I helped my husband move into his brand new office. And we got it looking pretty good, but it's missing that statement piece, that little bit of awesome. Howdy, I'm Sadie Mae with the Awesome Orange, and today I'm going to show you how I made him this awesome carved console. Let's get started. A big thank you to Saburrtooth for sponsoring this video. When I designed this piece, I knew I wanted a dramatic deep carve, so I chose to make it out of 8/4 alder or 2 inches thick. I also wanted the grain to be continuous, so I milled the rough wood and glued up a panel the same way I do a tabletop. Then I took that out of the clamps and laid out where the face frame and the doors were going to go. I went with a 3-inch face frame all around the doors. And once I had that laid out, it was time to start cutting into my perfectly good tabletop using my track saw. When I designed this, I was going to miter the edges of the front and the sides without even thinking if my track saw could handle it. Well, I quickly discovered it couldn't. It only cuts up to 1.5 inch depth at a 45-degree angle. And after milling, mine was a little over 1 5/8 inches. So I decided butt joints would have to do. If I had to do it over, I would have planed the boards down more to make them thinner before glue up. But sometimes we just have to go with the flow, so I went ahead and cut these at a 90-degree angle, and those will be the 2 side pieces. With those cut, it was time to cut out the doors. And to compensate for the kerf or the thickness of the blade, I made another line so I knew exactly where to lay my track for those cuts, which was roughly about a 1/8 in from that 3-inch mark I had for the face frame. Then I plunged the saw into the wood and cut the majority of the line. Since the blade is round, it won't make it all the way to the corners on both the top and the bottom, so I'll have to finish the cuts off later. But this was a little nerve-wracking, making sure that I didn't go past the line and cut into that face frame. So nice and slow, and pick it up, move it on, and plunge into the second part. With the majority of it cut, it was time to finish off cutting out these doors with my Japanese pull saw. And I finally learned what the 2 different sides of the saw are. There's one side for rip cuts, which has less teeth on it, and the second side has more teeth for cross cuts, in which I had both of them on this tabletop because I have the corners there. Knowing which side to use makes the cut so much easier and faster. With a couple more pulls in each corner, these doors were free of the face frame. Some of the edges were a little rough, but I was super excited how clean I was actually able to get these doors cut out of this panel. So a little sanding, these will be all as good as new. Now I took those 2 side pieces we originally cut and trimmed them to their final width over at the table saw. I did this to ensure that both of them were the exact same width. I did then do a little more trimming on the door panels themselves. Because the pull saw kerf is less than the plunge saw, there was little nibs that needed to be cut off. Then it was time for assembly. For this, I used my Craig pocket hole jig 520 and wood glue. I like that this jig is portable and I can bring it to bigger pieces like this. With the 2 sides attached, it was time to take the top and bottom panels out of the clamps and get those trimmed down to size. You'll see here, I just laid the piece on top of the top and the bottom and then marked exactly where the line was, trimmed them, and then again attach them using the pocket hole jig. And boy, is this piece now getting heavy. But let's get it laid on its side because it's now time to start adding the texture. I first laid out some guidelines to help me keep everything straight and level. And these were about 1.5 inches wide all the way down the piece. And with the dust collector on, it was time to start carving. I'm using a die grinder with a 1-inch Saburrtooth burr. It's a sphere burr, an extra coarse grit, or orange. This is definitely my favorite shape burr, and it's great for control. To start each section, I just take a few short passes to ensure that they're straight without pushing very hard. Once I've got that line, then I can start pushing a little bit harder and changing my angle to get deeper in the middle and kind of peak those on the side so that there will be a ridge and I'll kind of scoop in there. So that's what I'm kind of getting the hang of here, which way to hold it, which way direction I like the burr in. And then I did have another burr on hand that I want to test out to see if I liked it better. It's a 7/8 inch sphere burr and a much coarser grit. It's called a Supreme burr and 125 grit. So I put that on. It's only 7/8 of an inch sphere, so it's a little bit smaller than the first one I was using. So I did go ahead and test this out, and it is very aggressive and can remove the material faster than the orange one. But I did feel like since it was smaller, I didn't have as much control and it was harder to get an even width. So as you'll see, I do end up changing and going back to the orange one, and I think it worked great for this project and for the density of this alder. To get the ridges just how I wanted them, there was a lot of back and forth. I would approach one line from one side and then do the other side of the ridge from the other side. So back and forth seemed to work really well to get the texture I was going for. Oh, and did I mention that this creates some sawdust, like a lot of sawdust? But clamping this dust scoop to my workbench did help with that a little bit. And with the two sides carved, I went ahead and installed the doors because I want to make sure that the lines are straight across the front. I'm also using some narrow heavy-duty hinges because these doors are solid. I'm recessing the hinge on the door side to ensure that the space around the doors is the same on all 4 sides. I marked where the hinges are going to go, then I scored the lines and cut out the majority with a trim router, and then I cleaned up the edges with a chisel. After installing the doors and getting this far, that dance break was well deserved. Now it's time to finish carving the front. First up was marking those lines. Again, they're about 1.5 inches in spacing. And then we carve the front. This definitely was done in stages. I would do as far as I could reach on the bottom, go up as high as I felt comfortable with. Later on, I had to use a step ladder and eventually flip the entire piece over. Around the hinges, I didn't go as deep, and we'll finish that part off once I get this taken apart and done with the entire carve. This just ensures that those lines are going to match up evenly once I'm done. With the majority of carving done, my shop was screaming for help. It was completely covered in sawdust, even using that dust scoop. My poor clamps. And I was definitely worn out and dirty. But look at those lines. Okay, another dance break. Then I cleaned up around those hinges. I made sure to get them deeper, but I did make a line. I didn't want to go all the way off so you'd see more of the hinges. I wanted to be able to see more of the wood. So I just go right up into that line, and I think it turned out great once the hinges are on. Then everybody's least favorite part of any project, sanding. And I did a lot of it with a lot of different pieces. If you want more information of what I use for sanding, check out my blog and I'll leave a link in the description box below. But here you can see at the top, it's all sharp in edges. And then as we get closer to the bottom, the sanding just softens the piece right up. And the last step was to cut a rabbet on the back to hold the back panel. So I just used my trim router and a rabbeting bit to quickly get that done and create more sawdust in the shop. And then lastly, I went ahead and put a top coat on this. I'm using General Finishes High Performance Poly in a matte finish. I like this finish because it is completely clear and it's a buildable finish. So I put one coat on. I do sand in between coats with 220 grit, then vacuum it, wipe it down, get all the dust off, and then put another coat on top. I did this 3 times. It fills any imperfections in the wood and makes a super smooth finish. I added some simple pulls and some magnetic latches and stops at the bottom to hold the doors closed. Hi, Oscar. And you guys, I absolutely love how this piece turned out. It has the personality and it's just awesome in my husband's office, exactly what it needed. I would love to hear what you think in the comments below, and I do have a blog post with all the descriptions of everything I used and links to all the products. And if you want to try power carving for yourself, use the code AwesomeOrange10 to get 10% off on Saburrtooth's website for any of their carving burrs. Thank you so much for watching and following my building journey. And remember, build loud, build wild, and have an awesome day.
I feel like this could be better.
I can't believe my eyes. I can't believe my eyes. Now you're just showing off. I can't believe my eyes. Don't stop. Now you're just showing off. I see you. I see you. I see you. I see you.